This video is a journey into a world that existed between two great eras, one that had already fallen and one that had not yet risen. We call it the Middle Ages, and for centuries it was misunderstood as a time of pure darkness, ignorance, and suffering. But the truth is far more complicated and far more human than any single label can capture. We will walk through the streets of medieval towns, enter the halls of castles and the quiet corridors of monasteries. We will look at what people ate, how they slept, what they feared, what they believed, and how they found meaning in a world that offered them very little certainty. We will explore the lives of peasants who made up the vast majority of the population, the lords who ruled over them, the clergy who guided their souls, and the merchants who slowly began to change everything. This is not a story about kings and battles. It is a story about ordinary people living through extraordinary times. If you enjoy this video, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments what you would like to hear about next. To understand how people lived in the Middle Ages, you first need to understand what they believed about the world they had been born into. For a medieval person, the universe was not a cold and indifferent place governed by physical laws. It was a living, layered creation made by God, watched over by God, and heading toward a final moment of divine judgment. Every event, whether a good harvest or a sudden plague, carried meaning. Nothing happened by accident. Nothing was random. The world was a text written by God, and every creature, every season, every sign in the sky was a word in that text. This belief shaped everything. It shaped how people understood illness, not as a malfunction of the body, but as a message or a test. It shaped how they understood poverty, not as a social problem to be solved, but as a condition with spiritual significance. It shaped how they understood their place in society, as a role assigned by divine order, fixed and purposeful. The medieval world was divided, in the minds of those who lived in it, into three great orders. Those who prayed, the clergy, who interceded with God on behalf of everyone else. Those who fought, the knights and lords, who provided protection. And those who worked, the peasants and craftsmen, who produced everything that sustained life. This was not just a description, it was a moral framework. Each person had a duty to fulfill their role completely and honestly. A priest who neglected prayer, a knight who refused to protect the weak, a peasant who abandoned the field. All of these were failures, not just of practical duty, but of spiritual responsibility. The idea that a person could choose a different life, that they could move from one order to another through ambition or effort alone, was not only unusual. It was, for much of the medieval period, considered a kind of disorder. The world had a shape, and that shape was sacred. For the overwhelming majority of people in medieval Europe, life began and ended in a village. Not a town, not a city, a small cluster of houses surrounded by fields, forests, and pasture land, usually home to no more than a few hundred souls. These villages were not idyllic places of simple contentment. They were communities organized around a single, constant pressure: survival. Every decision, every relationship, every tradition was shaped by the need to produce enough food to last through the year. And in a world without refrigeration, without reliable transportation, and without any safety net beyond your neighbors, that pressure was absolute. The landscape around a typical medieval village was organized into a system of open fields. Large strips of land shared among the villagers according to complex rules of rotation and allocation. No single family owned their strips outright. The land belonged, in a legal sense, to the lord of the manor. What the peasant possessed was the right to use it, and that right came with obligations. These obligations varied from place to place and changed considerably over the centuries, but in the early and high medieval period they were often severe. A serf, the most bound form of peasant, could not leave the village without permission. They owed the lord a certain number of days of labour each week on the lord's own fields. They paid fees to use the mill, to bake bread in the communal oven, to cross the bridge, to marry their daughter. Death itself triggered a payment to the lord, who claimed the best animal of the deceased family as a kind of final tax. In return, the lord was supposed to provide protection, military defense, the resolution of disputes, and the maintenance of order. Whether this obligation was fulfilled, honestly, depended entirely on the character of the individual lord. The peasant's year was governed not by a clock, but by a calendar of seasons and saints. Spring meant ploughing and planting. Summer meant weeding, tending and anxiety about the weather. Autumn meant harvest, an intense period of collective labour on which the survival of the entire village depended. Winter was a time of relative quiet, when food stores were slowly drawn down and the cold pressed in from every direction. People rose with the sun and slept not long after dark. They ate 2 meals a day, sometimes 3. The main food was bread, dense, dark, made from rye or barley rather than wheat, which was more expensive and often reserved for better-off households. Alongside bread came pottage, a thick stew of vegetables, grains, and whatever scraps of meat or fat were available. Meat was a rarity for most peasants, present at feasts and festivals, but absent from the ordinary table. Ale was drunk by everyone, including children. Water from streams and rivers was often contaminated, and ale, even weak ale, was safer. A peasant might consume several pints a day, not to get drunk, but simply to stay hydrated without getting sick. The houses in which peasants lived were small, dark, and shared with animals. A typical rural dwelling consisted of a single large room, sometimes with a loft, built from timber and wattle and daub, thatched with straw. The floor was packed earth, covered with rushes or straw. The central hearth provided warmth and the means to cook, but chimneys were rare in early periods, and smoke simply drifted upward and out through gaps in the roof. The smell of smoke, animals, food, and unwashed bodies was constant and unremarkable. Sleeping arrangements would strike a modern observer as extraordinarily intimate. Families slept together, often in a single bed or on pallets, arranged close to the fire. Privacy in the modern sense did not exist. Children grew up watching everything: arguments, illness, birth, and death, as ordinary parts of life. At the top of the local social order stood the lord, the man who owned the land, commanded military service, and dispensed justice within his domain. In the early medieval period, the lord might be a relatively minor figure, controlling a single village and a modest fortified residence. By the high medieval period, the great magnates commanded vast territories, multiple castles, and private armies of knights. The castle, which we tend to think of as an impressive architectural achievement, began in far simpler form. The earliest medieval fortifications were often little more than a mound of earth, called a motte, topped with a wooden tower, surrounded by a fenced enclosure called a bailey. These were not beautiful. They were functional. They were built quickly, often in response to an immediate military threat, and their purpose was straightforward: to give a small number of defenders a significant advantage over a larger attacking force. Over time, as wealth accumulated and military technology evolved, castles became more elaborate. The wooden palisades gave way to stone curtain walls, The towers grew higher and more sophisticated. Wells were dug inside to ensure water during sieges. Gatehouses, drawbridges, and portcullises were added. The castle became not just a military installation, but a symbol of power, a visible statement of dominance over the surrounding landscape. But the castle was also a home, and understanding how it functioned as a home helps us understand the social world it contained. The Great Hall was the heart of the castle. Here the Lord ate, conducted business, dispensed justice, and received visitors. Long tables were set for meals, and the placement of each person at those tables communicated their social rank with perfect clarity. The Lord sat at the high table, raised on a dais, eating better food and drinking better wine than those lower down the hall. Meals in a lord's household were elaborate rituals. The quality and variety of food on the table was a statement of wealth and power. A great feast might include multiple courses of roasted meats, venison, boar, pheasant, swan, along with pies, sauces, and sweetened dishes made with expensive imported spices. Spices, pepper, cinnamon, ginger, cloves, were extraordinarily valuable in the medieval period, and the ability to use them generously was itself a display of status. The Lord's household was not just a family. It was a small institution employing dozens or even hundreds of people in various capacities. Stewards managed accounts and oversaw the estate. Constables commanded the castle's military garrison. Chaplains attended to spiritual needs. Servants handled everything from cooking and cleaning to caring for horses and maintaining armor. To be continued.